Go ahead. If you're so brave, just leave, my sister said, certain I wouldn't last a week without them. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just placed the house keys quietly on the Christmas dinner table. They laughed, thinking it was just another empty threat. But by the very next morning, everything had changed. Their phones were blowing up. 66 missed calls, panic in every message. Because the moment I walked away, the entire empire they depended on started collapsing. The wine glass in my sister's hand caught the glint of the Christmas lights, her sharp, predatory smile cutting through the festive atmosphere of the dining room. I felt something deep inside me finally splinter beyond repair as the weight of 1,000 silent insults came to a head. Go ahead, Madison announced, her voice projected perfectly so every member of the Holt family could hear. If you are actually as brave as you pretend to be, then just leave, she challenged. You would not last a single week without us to prop you up. Her words seemed to hover above the clatter of silverware and the polished laughter of our guests, drowning out the soft carols humming from the speakers. Everyone at the table turned to watch me, their eyes filled with a cruel sort of amusement, waiting for me to shrink back into the shadows the way I always had. Instead, I reached for the heavy ring of keys resting beside my dinner plate. These were the house keys, the car keys, the symbols of a life they truly believed belonged to them. I laid them down on the white linen cloth with a deliberate, quiet click. It was a soft sound, nearly lost in the room, but Madison heard it. Her triumphant smile froze in place. My parents stiffened in their chairs, their expressions turning to stone. As the snow began to drift past the windows, I stood up without uttering a single word. I walked past the towering Christmas tree, glowing in its curated shades of red and gold, and stepped out into the biting night air. Behind me, the fragile sounds of forced holiday cheer collapsed into a stunned, heavy silence. I knew that by sunrise, that silence would mutate into a frantic panic, but for now, I just walked. I had not stopped to grab my coat. I had not packed a bag. I took nothing with me except my phone and the small, heavy envelope my mother had pressed into my hand 2 days before she passed away. Not yet, she had whispered with a look of intense gravity I didn't understand at the time. You will know exactly when it is time to open it. I stepped off the porch, letting the fresh snow swallow the sound of my retreating footsteps. The house behind me looked like a postcard, glowing with warm lights, perfectly manicured and hollow. It was exactly how the Holts liked to appear to the world. Inside, I could picture my father, Richard, scowling because I had finally deviated from the script he had written for my life. My mother, Claudia, would be pretending her hands weren't shaking as she reached for more wine. And Madison, who had been so desperate for a scene and a victory, was left with nothing but the cold realization that I had refused to fold. The freezing air burned my lungs, but it felt cleaner than the air inside that house. My breath rose in white plumes, vanishing like ghosts into the dark. I did not have a destination in mind, and I didn't need one. I only needed to put distance between myself and the version of me that was trained to obey. It was a surreal feeling, walking away from the only home I had ever known. It was a place where I had been treated as a useful tool, but never as a person of value. For years, I was the one who paid the bills they never looked at, signed the complex documents they never bothered to read, and carried the weight of responsibilities that should never have been mine. They called me the dependable one, but I realized now that dependable was just a polite word for controllable. By the time I reached the end of the long street, I noticed my hands were shaking. It wasn't the cold or fear, it was the overwhelming rush of relief. I watched cars pass by, their headlights cutting through the falling snow. Inside those cars were families who looked whole, living lives that felt real. The Holt family had never been whole. We were a performance sustained by image, reputation, and an arrogant belief that we were above the rules. But even the most polished performances eventually crack. I walked for nearly an hour before stopping at a small, deserted park downtown. I sat on a frost-covered bench, ignoring the sting of the cold in my legs. I wasn't ready to move toward a future yet, and I wasn't ready to look back. My phone began to buzz in my pocket once, then twice, then a dozen times. I ignored it. I watched the snow fall in slow, hypnotic spirals, feeling for the first time in years that I could breathe without measuring the oxygen in the room. My thoughts drifted to my mother, Evelyn Walsh Holt. She had been the quiet, intelligent center of our family's chaos. To the world, she was the supportive wife standing half a step behind my father, but I had always noticed her eyes. She saw everything. When she died a year ago, my father didn't mourn her. He was simply inconvenienced by the loss of the woman who ran the machinery of his life. When the paperwork and the finances fell to me, I thought I was just doing my duty. I remembered her final whisper, "Everything is already arranged. You just need to hold it together until the time is right." I finally looked at my phone. The screen was a wall of notifications. There were 18 missed calls from my father, 14 from my mother, and 34 from Madison. A bitter, dry laugh escaped my chest. They weren't worried about my safety in the freezing night. They were worried about their loss of control. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I knew they would be filled with demands, accusations, or the fake affection they used as a weapon. I stood up, brushing the snow from my jeans, my fingers almost entirely numb. I didn't know where I would sleep, but I knew I couldn't go back for my car yet. As I walked toward a wooded trail near the park, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I am awake if you need somewhere to go. LG." The initials belonged to Linda Graves, my mother's longtime lawyer. She had been oddly expectant at the will reading, telling me my mother trusted me more than anyone. I texted her back that I was okay but needed space. Her reply was immediate, "I know, but you should come by tomorrow. There are things you need to see." A cold shiver that had nothing to do with the weather traced my spine. The envelope in my pocket felt like it was humming against my leg. My mother had always been a master of timing. I found a small, old brick cafe that was still open and stepped inside for warmth. The barista handed me peppermint tea without asking questions, seeing the state I was in. As I sat there, a text from Madison flashed on the screen. "You think you are hurting us? You are pathetic. Come home before you embarrass yourself." I turned the phone off. The next morning, I woke up in a cheap hotel room, the silence feeling like a hard-earned prize. My phone was nearly dead from the barrage of messages. My father's latest text was a command, "Come home now. We need to talk." Then another, "Where are you? The bank account link isn't working." I realized then that the household was already starting to unravel. My father had never bothered to learn how his own life was funded, assuming I would always be there to handle the dirty work. I showered, checked out, and walked to Linda Graves' office. The office was warm and smelled of pine. Linda didn't look surprised to see me. She sat me down and looked at the envelope I was clutching. "Before you open that," she said, "you need context." She pulled out a thick file tied with a black ribbon. She explained that 5 years ago, my mother had come to her not just for a will, but for protection. My mother had seen how the family exploited my reliability, and she had made massive, secret changes to ensure they couldn't ruin me. Linda opened the file and spread out deeds, records, and documents. My name was at the top of every single one. The house, the secondary properties, the investment accounts, the family trust, it was all mine. My mother had transferred everything to me legally and gradually, keeping me in the dark so the family couldn't sabotage the plan. I sat back, my heart thundering. The Holt empire didn't belong to my father or Madison. It belonged to me. I finally broke the seal on my mother's letter. Her handwriting was a comfort on the page. She told me that if I was reading this, I had finally found the strength to walk away, something she had prayed for. She told me I was stronger than all of them and warned me not to let guilt pull me back once the veil lifted and the family realized they had lost everything. "Even love has limits," she had written. I cried quietly in the office, feeling the weight of her protection from beyond the grave. Linda informed me that the family was currently locked out of everything. They would panic, they would blame me, and eventually, they would crawl back out of dependency. A knock at the door interrupted us. My father was on the line, sounding desperate. Linda told me not to answer. She showed me another document. They had discovered the house deed was no longer in my father's name. The timeline was accelerating. When I eventually left the office and went to a nearby cafe to think, Madison found me. She slid into the booth, looking frazzled and angry. "We need to talk," she snapped. I looked at her, feeling a strange new sense of calm. "No," I replied. "You need to talk. I don't owe you anything." She began ranting about the accounts not loading and how Dad couldn't pay the contractors. She told me the bank wouldn't speak to anyone but the primary owner. She demanded I fix it now, still not realizing that the power dynamic of our entire lives had shifted forever in the last 12 hours. Madison stared at me across the small table, her expression shifting from irritation to a cold, frantic disbelief. "It was difficult," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but carrying a weight that seemed to anchor the air between us. She let out a sharp, jagged breath. "Are you kidding me right now? This is not funny, Meredith." We're dealing with an actual crisis. I tilted my head, watching her with a detached clarity I had never felt before. What crisis? I asked. You know exactly what crisis. Madison's voice finally cracked, her polished composure sliding away like melting ice. The house, Meredith. The house. The bank told Dad that the primary deed holder has to update the verification manually. And when he went to check the name on the official record, it said, she stopped abruptly, the name catching in her throat as if the mere reality of it was poison. I let the silence press down on her, heavy and unrelenting. Finally, she forced the word out in a terrified whisper. Yours. Her face twisted as she gripped the edge of the table. How is that even possible? How did you get the house? I didn't get it, I replied calmly. Mom gave it to me. Madison's jaw fell slack, her eyes wide with shock. That is impossible. I asked her 3 different times if she had updated the deed after I moved out, and she said she had. She told you whatever she had to, I said quietly. But she told me what actually mattered. Madison shook her head violently, her hands beginning to tremble. No, she wouldn't do that. She wouldn't choose you over the rest of the family. She didn't choose anyone, I countered. She protected me. The words landed with the impact of a physical blow. Madison's eyes filled with something sharp, dangerous, and ugly. This is unbelievable. You walk out of dinner like some dramatic martyr, and suddenly you are lording your magical inheritance over everyone. I stared at her, feeling a small, fading flicker of grief. She really didn't see it, not then, and likely not ever. I didn't take a single thing from you, I told her. I am just not carrying you anymore. She shot to her feet, her palms slamming onto the wooden table with a resounding thud. A few people in the cafe looked over, startled by the outburst. Madison lowered her voice, but the fury behind it was palpable. You listen to me, Meredith. Our parents are losing it. The contractors are calling every hour. Dad's business account is frozen solid. The utilities are flagged and pending authorization. None of this makes any sense. And now the house? How is the house yours? How did Mom? She cut herself off, her eyes widening as the realization finally took hold. Oh my God, she whispered. Mom planned this. I didn't confirm it, I didn't have to. Madison sank back into her seat, looking stunned. Then, slowly, her expression hardened into that brittle, cruel look she had worn so many times during our childhood right before she took something from me just because she could. Fine, she said. Play this game if you want. But you will come home today. You will fix every single one of these problems, and then we are going to straighten out whatever ridiculous legal glitch put your name on that deed. No, I said. She blinked, taken aback. No, I repeated. I am not coming back. I am not fixing anything, and nothing about this is a glitch. The estate is mine. Legally, fully, and permanently. Madison laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that lacked any real conviction. Dad will never allow that. It isn't his decision, I reminded her. Her face twisted into a sneer. Mom was always too sentimental. She didn't understand what this family actually needed to survive. Dad and I were the ones who kept everything functioning, not you. Is that really what you told yourself all these years? I asked softly. That is what is true. She snapped. I didn't argue. I simply slipped my coat on, stood up, and placed a few bills on the table for the tea I hadn't touched. Good luck, Madison, I said. You can't just walk away from this. She yelled. I already did. I stepped past her and left the cafe before she could formulate her next threat. Outside, the sun was fully up, casting a pale gold light across the icy streets. I pulled my hood up and walked, feeling the crisp air sting my cheeks. Behind me, I heard the cafe door fly open and Madison shouting my name. People turned to look. She hated that unwanted attention meant she wasn't in control of the narrative. I kept walking. She didn't follow me far. Madison always stopped when the chase required actual effort. As I reached the corner, my phone buzzed again. This time, the caller ID made me pause. Birch Creek County Tax Office. I let it ring twice before answering. This is Meredith, I said. A polite voice responded, Miss Holt, we are calling to confirm authorization for the tax exemption update on your Birch Hollow property. My Birch Hollow property? I repeated, the reality of it sinking in. Yes, ma'am, the clerk said. It appears your family attempted to access several accounts under your name this morning. Since you are listed as the sole owner, we need confirmation directly from you. My pulse steadied. Sole owner? Right. Yes, ma'am. Would you like to authorize the exemption update? I looked down the street at the snow melting under the weak winter sun. Yes, I said. Go ahead. I ended the call and kept walking until I reached the small wooden bridge crossing the half-frozen creek. I leaned on the railing, letting the cold seep through my gloves. So, this was what agency felt like. It didn't roar. It didn't announce itself with a fanfare. It settled quietly, like snow on branches. Then, a text arrived from my father. You need to call me immediately. The accountant says your mother transferred the family trust into your name. That cannot be legal. Fix this now. I exhaled slowly. He still spoke to me like I was an errand, not a person. Another message arrived from my mother. Meredith, please. Your father is upset. Your sister is upset. Come home and let's figure this out together. Together. We had never done anything together. I saved the messages and turned the phone off. I headed toward the bus station. There was only one place I needed to go, the cabin on Glacier Road. It was my mother's sanctuary, the place she hoped I would return to. I bought a ticket and watched the town shrink behind me as the bus climbed into the mountains. I imagined my father pacing the kitchen and Madison tearing through drawers looking for documents that didn't belong to her. Their empire was slipping through their fingers because they had built it on my mother's silence and my compliance. The silence was gone. When I arrived at the cabin, it smelled of cedar and memory. I found a maple box, hidden beneath blankets in a wardrobe. Inside were envelopes, a USB drive, and a notebook. I opened the first envelope and found bank statements with my signature, but I had never seen them. Loans I hadn't taken, transfers I hadn't authorized, a credit card I never used. Every signature was a forgery, featuring my father's slanted R and Madison's overconfident loops. They had used my identity to fund their lives. I listened to an audio file on the USB drive. My mother was confronting them. I know you used her name on the loan, she told my father. It's just paperwork, Evelyn, he replied. It benefits the family. Madison's voice followed. Meredith doesn't need all that money. She should be grateful she has a purpose. My mother's response was quiet. I will protect her, even from you. I sat in the silence of the cabin, the weight of their betrayal settling into my bones. They had siphoned my life away while smiling to my face. My mother had documented every forged signature and every unauthorized withdrawal for years. As the sun began to set, a loud pounding came at the cabin door. Meredith, Madison shouted from outside. Open the door. You can't hide up here forever. I looked at the box of evidence, my mother's final gift. No, Madison, I whispered. I'm not coming home. You're coming to me. The air inside the cabin grew heavy as Madison's screams echoed against the heavy wooden door. She wasn't just angry. She was desperate, her voice thin and jagged like broken glass. I didn't move an inch. I stood in the center of the room, my pulse a steady drum in my ears, as I listened to the muffled sound of her footsteps retreating. The engine of her car roared, tires spinning fruitlessly in the slush until finally, the sound faded into the distance. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. She had come here for one reason, to corner me emotionally where she believed I was still weak. She didn't understand that the sister she had preyed upon for decades no longer existed. As night blanketed the mountains in an oppressive, icy blue, I lit the small lamp and opened my mother's notebook one more time. I traced the curves of her handwriting, soaking in her warnings and the quiet strength she had possessed while her body was failing her. By the time I reached the final page, my decision was absolute. A confrontation was coming, but it wouldn't happen on their terms. It wouldn't happen in that polished, hollow dining room. It would happen on mine. The next morning, the sky was a washed-out gray, pressing low over the peaks. I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the branches groan under the weight of the frost. My phone, which I had reluctantly powered back on, began to vibrate with the mechanical persistence of a dying animal. There were 17 new voicemails. I deleted them in batches, 8 from my father, 4 from my mother, 3 from Madison. But one short message from an unknown number stopped my thumb. It was Cameron Price, the family's longtime accountant. He was a man of meticulous ethics, the only person in my parents' orbit who had ever treated me with genuine respect. I dialed him back immediately. He answered before the first ring finished, his voice heavy with an exhale. Meredith, I'm glad you called, he said quietly. I assume you know about the trust and the property transfers. I know everything, I replied. Then you understand why they are panicking. He explained that my father had called him volatile and demanding, insisting on a system override to regain access to the accounts. When Cameron refused, my father had snapped, claiming my mother must have been out of her mind to put me in charge. The tea in my hands went cold as Cameron delivered the real blow. The accounts weren't just inaccessible to them, they were in critical condition. My father and Madison had spent the last 3 years siphoning money, leveraging the family home, and taking out massive loans under my name. I know about the forgeries, I interrupted, my voice steady despite the bile rising in my throat. My mother left proof. A stunned silence followed before Cameron whispered, "Then you have everything you need. Your father tried to withdraw $70,000 yesterday to cover a payroll gap, and the bank flagged it. He thinks control is something he can demand, but he has run out of both money and time." A strange mix of grief and vindication twisted in my chest. Their empire was weeks away from a total collapse. Madison's credit was a ruin, and my mother's personal savings had been drained to cover debts they had hidden from me. Cameron warned me that my father had scheduled a meeting with a high-priced attorney to challenge the estate, intending to claim I had manipulated my mother in her final days. "He will lose," Cameron said firmly, "but he will be dangerous." "I'm proud of you, Meredith. You deserve better than what they did to you." After we hung up, the cabin felt smaller. The weight of the evidence in my backpack felt like armor against my spine. I was preparing to leave when I heard voices outside, low, urgent, and familiar. My heart slammed against my ribs. I peeked through the curtain to see Madison and my mother, Claudia, trudging through the snow. Madison's profile was sharp with fury. My mother's posture was stiff with a desperation she tried to mask. The knock on the door rattled the entire frame. "Meredith," Madison screamed. "We know you're in there. Open this door right now." I stood completely still, my hands curled into fists. Then came my mother's voice, dripping with a practiced, saccharine sweetness. "Honey, please. We just want to talk." Talk. The word tasted like ash. They wanted to manipulate, to rewrite history, to douse me in the guilt they had used to keep me in line for years. Madison's fury finally boiled over. "Do you think you can hide?" she shrieked. "You destroyed everything. Dad's business is collapsing and you just walk away? You owe us. You owe us everything." Her words were a confession of their entitlement. They didn't see me as a person, I was a resource they had exhausted. The car doors slammed, and the tires scraped against the ice as they sped away, leaving me in a silence that finally felt like power. I headed down the mountain to meet Linda Graves at her office. She looked at me with a fierce satisfaction as I handed over the wooden box. "This will end them," she said. I asked her if that was truly what we wanted, and she looked me in the eye. "We aren't ending them, Meredith. They ended themselves. You are just the only one standing outside the wreckage." While we sat there, the bank manager called. My father had tried to liquidate a joint investment account and was denied again. Then, a fax arrived, a request for an emergency trustee hearing filed by Richard Holt. He was desperate, trying to contest my position by any means necessary. Linda just chuckled and hit send on a legal reply that effectively blocked all communication. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to defend my right to exist alone. I returned to the cabin as the sky turned a bruised lavender. My phone was a graveyard of missed calls and group texts. The family meeting was set for 6 p.m., a non-negotiable command. The messages were a perfect distillation of our history. "We need you." Not a single word of love or apology. I ignored them all. The final piece of news came from Cameron. My father's business partner had discovered the diverted funds and filed a fraud report. Financial investigators were moving in. If they found the forged documents my mother had meticulously archived, the consequences would be criminal. The matches my mother had left behind were finally catching fire, burning down the house of cards my family had built. I walked to the edge of the property, looking down at the flickering lights of the town below. They were down there plotting how to bring me back to heel, but they were already ghosts. I reached into the mailbox and found one final letter from my father. It was formal, cold, and demanding my immediate surrender of all assets. I didn't even finish reading it. I let the wind catch the paper, watching it tumble into the dark woods. I turned back toward the cabin, the warmth of the wood stove waiting for me. My mother's voice echoed in my head, a final, beautiful benediction. "You have already won." I stepped inside and closed the door, finally at peace, leaving the Holts to face the winter alone. The silence was no longer something I had to fill with their excuses. It was finally mine.